The first speaker is Mr. Samuel Boscarello from Italy, who is going to present us a presentation, Entrepreneurs of Social Conflict, Co-operators and Revolt Leaders in the Italian Crisis from 1893 till 1894. Mr. Boscarello, if you are ready, so you can start from now. The floor is yours.
Well, I am ready. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation. Well, it's about coffee time, so I have a cup of coffee with me and come with me inside the story I want to tell you about. Well, imagine this scenery. There is a country with not just one, not two, but three different crises exploding contemporarily. This is Italy at the end of 19th century. And what are these three crises? There are financial crisis, political scandals, and agrarian crisis. Let's start with the first. Financial crisis. During the 80th decade of the century, the most important Italian banks made several investments in real estate, especially in big cities such as Rome and Naples. But this led to a speculative bubble which explodes at the end of the decade, leaving these banks in several problems. The government reacts by sending inspectors into these institutes to verify their solidness. But strangely, the results of the reportage remain secret. Why? The reason is revealed some year after, in 1892, when an MP, who is affiliated to the radical socialist left. His name is Napoleone Colajanni, and write off this name in a piece of paper because he will return. Napoleone Colajanni reveals that there is a very important bank, La Banca Romana, the Roman bank, which used to spend money without any control and covers the losses by printing other money illegally. And the worst thing is that part of this money has been used to fund the electoral campaigns of several politicians. So the financial crisis turns itself into a political scandal which undermines the credibility of Italian government. The scenery is complete with the third factor of crisis, the agrarian crisis. The growing globalization of markets is pushing inside Italian markets cheaper crops provenient from Americas, Australia, Russia. The Italian agrarians are in difficulties and they react by switching the cultivations in their lands. For example, substituting crops with grapevines. Why in particular grapevines? Because the globalization of market, it's not bringing from Americas to Europe just cheaper crops. It is bringing also a little parasite called phylloxera. And this little beast has the capacity of killing tons and tons of grapevines all across the Europe and especially in France. So what the Italian agrarians seeks to do is to substitute the French producers in the market. But there is a problem. The problem is that the growing integration of markets is pushing year after year the European governments in inaugurating new protectionist policies. So in 1887, Italy and France begin a trade war, and this is a ruin for a lot of investors who put their money in French markets. Well, there is a certain point into the call for this conference when it said that the best moment for social activities is the time of crisis. And in some way, this is confirmed also by the story I'm telling about. But to understand more precisely what I want to say, let's focus on a particular region in Italy. This region is Sicily. Sicily in 19th century is an eminently agrarian region, so it is heavily hit by the crisis like any other Italian region. But in addition, we have to consider that Sicilian peasants are living permanently under a structural situation of extreme poverty and exploitation. The structure of Sicilian economy is like a pyramid. At the top, there are landowners who are not practically involved in the management of the land. There are rentiers, very rich and powerful rentiers. At the middle, there are the concrete managers of the land, the so-called gabellotti. But the labor force is provided by the lowest ladder of the pyramid, the peasants. And the peasants are employed with a very wide range of contracts, most of them resembling the feudality. For example, one of the most oppressive forms of rural labor is the so-called terratico. Terratico obligates peasants to provide a fixed amount of products to the landowners without any regard to the results of the harvest. But were this situation well known by the political class? Yes, yes. In 1876, two conservative MPs, their names are Sidney Sonnino and Leopoldo Franchetti, published a reportage about the dramatic condition of Sicilian peasants. And what it is very interesting to us is that Sonnino and Franchetti proposed a wide series of remedies, and among these remedies, there were also the promotion of cooperatives. It should not surprise us because Sonnino and Franchetti comes from Tuscany. And in Tuscany, as in other regions of central and northern Italy, the cooperative movement is very strong and is rising year after year, demonstrating all its potentialities. The situation in southern Italy is quite different. Here, the rise of cooperative movement faces many more obstacles. Why? The answer to this question, taking into account another wider question, which is an object of long and harsh debate in Italy, the debate about the historical backwardness of the southern Italy. There is a very famous study carried out by Robert Putnam and his collaborators, which affirms that in southern Italy there is less cooperation because there is a lack of civic culture. In substance, they say that while central and northern Italy experimented since the Middle Ages various forms of communal self-government, the southern regions have been ruled always by centralistic, authoritarian, quasi-colonial forms of political regimes. Well, I think that this is partly correct, but let's make the scenery more complex. In fact, if we read directly from the words of Franchetti and Sonnino, we'll find that they tell us a quite different story. Now, listen carefully, please, because I'm reading directly from their words. Into the Sicilian peasants is very vivid the spirit of association. Nevertheless, they lack the necessary schooling and moral education to collect from the association all the fruits it can give. Well, it is very interesting because there are several sources from the 19th century which says the very similar things. In the southern Italy, the cooperation does not work because people are illiterate. There is a common idea that education in the sense of schooling, shakes the common people from their numbness, giving them a sense of initiative, a spirit of initiative. Well, in 1893, the situation has not changed. In Italy, there are about 2,500 cooperatives, but only 300 of them are located in the south. However, maybe the times they are changing, as Bob Dylan sings, because in Sicily, the tremendous condition of peasants leads to a mass mobilization, both in the urban areas and in the countryside. The channels of this mobilization are the so-called fasci, which obviously have nothing to do with fascism. Fasci are local coordinations between mostly pre-existent political societies, which share an orientation which is democratic, republican, or socialist. So they are political leagues. But for other aspects, they resound the trade unions. For example, in the summer of 1893, Fasci promotes a widespread series of land occupations in order to abolish the most oppressive forms of rural labor. And thirdly, one of the most important points of their program is the promotion of cooperative. During the 1893, there is a new wave of cooperation across Sicily. But who leads Fasci? Well, at the top of the internal hierarchy, there is a central committee run by the leaders of those Fasci who are located in the main cities of Sicily, for example, Catania, Palermo, Trapani, and so on. From a socioeconomical point of view, these leaders are representatives of urban middle classes, petty bourgeoisie. In some cases, they are politicians. Do you remember Napoleone Colajanni, the MP who revealed the scandal of Banca Romana? Well, he's an MP, a Sicilian MP, and in 1893 he ends up with having a major role in the organization of Fasci. From a political point of view, very rapidly the leadership of Fasci is hegemonized by socialists. And the fact that most part of the Fasci leaders are politicians or aspirant politicians has the consequence that Fasci leadership began to stress very much on the political goals of the movement. Month after month, it becomes clearer that Fasci leaders has the ultimate objective of conquering the local political power. And this is a problem for the cooperative wings of the movement, because the wider part of Fasci leaders does not see at cooperatives as a ultimate answer to the social question, but just as useful instrument to break up the alliance between the local political power and the local business elites. This behavior by the Fasci leaders is a problem for all the movement, because what's happening in the meantime? In December 1893, the Italian government falls for the aftermath of the Roman bank scandal. The new prime minister is Francesco Crispi, a Sicilian politician, former follower of Giuseppe Garibaldi. He is well known for being a sort of progressive. This should be a good news for the movement, isn't it? But it is not so, because Crispi is tremendously frightened by socialists. Not just for ideological reasons, but because socialists are threatening to steal away his own electoral basis, which are the worker societies, the urban middle classes, the petty bourgeoisie. So Crispi cannot absolutely legitimate Fasci as a political interlocutor. So when in the first day of January 1894, there is an escalation of clashes between the local political authorities and Sicilian Fasci, Crispi decides to leaving blank paper to the army managing the conflict. And the consequence is a very violent repression of Fasci with mass arrests and shocking killings. In the round of some weeks, the Fasci are swept away, and with them also the related cooperatives. But if there were no repression, could these new cooperatives have lasted over time? Were they well managed? Well, we have the first-hand witness of this in the person of Napoleone Colajanni again. Colajanni in 1895, 1 year after the repression, when the fog of war is over, collects his own memories in a book called The Sicilian Events and Their Causes. Well, in this book, he makes some examples of cooperatives set up by Fasci in the urban areas, especially, and their destiny. For example, in Palermo, Fasci set up a worker cooperative, which lasted for some time and then failed, because in general, they relied about workers' cooperatives to win public procurement, public contracts for public works from the municipal authorities. But across Sicily, the municipal government did not share the same advice and preferred to give public works to traditional enterprises. So the problem is that worker cooperatives of Fasci relied too much on political support for their survival. In Catania, there have been set up a consumer cooperative, but it worked with very primitive mechanisms. And also in Catania, there was a collective life insurance. But the problem is that this insurance was managed without taking into account mathematical and statistical evidence. For example, the insurance premium was fixed without consulting exactly the mortality tables. There was no risk management. And in this work by Colajanni, written in 1895, we can see all his bitterness, all his disillusionment about sort of the movement. In fact, just 2 years before, in 1893, in the middle of the mobilization, Colajanni wrote very different thing about this, very optimistic words about the fact that maybe Fasci were leading to a new generation in the Sicilian cooperation. But in 1893, the optimism of Colajanni. It's shared by the rest of the Italian cooperative movement. In reality, not so. I'll do an example. March 1893, in Corleone, a town near Palermo, which probably is well known in foreign countries for the films of Il Padrino, the Godfather. In Corleone, there is the local fascio, which creates a consumer cooperative. And the National League of Cooperatives, which is the association which represents the collective interests of Italian cooperative movement, the National League of Cooperatives reacts by, on one side, welcoming the Corleone cooperative. But on the other side, when it comes to analyze precisely the structure, the organization of this cooperative, the National League underlines that there are very important problems with that. For example, there is a very low limit on the amount of capital that each member can provide, can invest into the cooperative. And in the statute, it is not specified how the profits will be reinvested and so on. So behind the surface of the mobilization, the National League of Cooperative is aware that the cooperative movement in Sicily remains weak and poor. And this explains partly also the ambiguous behavior towards the Sicilian fascio. In fact, the Italian cooperative movement on one side recognized that the Sicilian uprising is inspired by a legitimate reason, but on the other side, they refuse effectively any effective involvement in it. Nevertheless, the National League of Cooperatives in 1893 seems much more attracted by a completely different event, which is taking place in Milan. In Milan, there is a local committee formed by pieces of aristocracy, entrepreneurs, professionals, which is trying to set up for 1894 an event called the Relight Exposition. This is a great series of fairs which have the objective of showing to the whole country that also in this time of crisis and uncertainty about the future, the technical progress and the social innovation can provide peaceful solutions to the social question. And inside this committee, there are also prominent cooperators such as Carlo Romussi, and they organize inside the Relight Exposition a particular fair called the International Worker Exposition. This is a showcase for the worker societies and the cooperative movement to let everyone see what they are practically doing to solve peacefully the social question. But this does not explain precisely why the cooperative movement is much more interested in an exposition, after all, with an exposition like many other, and not in an unprecedented mobilization in one of the poorest regions of the country. The reason is that the National League of Cooperative has a reformist approach to the problems, to the social problems. Their main concern is to create a solid, strong and good cooperatives which can last over a long time. And they think that the best environment to do this is an environment of social peace and not social uprising. Secondarily, there is a very common idea inside the movement that cooperation is a synonym of self-discipline, self-reliance. Well, in January 1894, there is a journal, a cooperative journal, that is discussing about the possible remedies to solve the Sicilian question. And this journal refuses, this journal is called La Cooperazione Rurale, the rural cooperation. And the journal refuses categorically any solution which implies the direct involvement of the government, for example, tax exemption. The reason is very clear, is very clearly explained. Also in the northern Italy, the peasants suffered, wrote the journalist, also in northern Italy, the peasants suffered from the crisis, but they organized without asking help to anyone. Why in Sicily should behave different? The Sicilian peasants should create cooperatives without any external influence And here the referral is the indirect referral is to socialists. Well, this same inspiration of self-reliance is what inspires the Milan Exposition. If we read the official catalog of the Milan Exposition, we will find a lot of references to this spirit, that Milan can demonstrate that the city can overcome the crisis without asking a single cent to Rome, and so on. So the National League of Cooperatives has an inspiration, which is a mentality, which is much nearer to those who inspires the local committee who ran the Rally Exposition than to the Sicilian Fasci. And this explains also why the majority of the Italian cooperative movement is so annoyed by the behavior of Sicilian socialist and Fasci leaders, because they tried to instrumentalize the cooperation for their own political struggles. I'm saying the majority of the Italian cooperative movement and not the whole movement, because in reality, there is also in Central and Northern Italy a part of cooperation which is shifting gradually towards socialism. And it becomes clearer in 1894, when, following the repression of Sicilian Fasci, the Crispi government inaugurates a series of public security measures against the socialist movement. And part of these measures hit also the cooperative movement. This is the first chapter of a confrontation into the country and also inside the cooperative movement between socialists and non-socialists. Inside the National League of Cooperatives, this confrontation will lead in 1919 to the split of the movement, I want to stop here about this because my aim is not to talk about the difference between socialist and non-socialist cooperation. Rather, I want to reflect about some suggestions of this story, and I want to discuss with you about them. The first evidence, it seems to me that in certain cases, while mobilization is very effective in fueling social activities, the survival chance for these social activities and the institution which derives from them, for example, the cooperatives, relies much more on long-term factors, such, for example, the literacy rate, and in general, the amount of human and social capital inside the community. But these long-term factors depend very much on the stability and the quality of social and political institutions rather than on the degree of social conflict. So maybe isn't that sometimes the social conflict, the role of social conflict is a bit overestimated, a bit overvalued when it comes to effectively create strong institutions in weak communities, and secondarily about relationships between politics and cooperatives. It seems to me that the assimilation of cooperation inside other political movements represents a double-edged sword. We have seen how damaging has been in the case of Sicilian Fasci the behavior of Fasci leadership with cooperatives. Effectively, on one hand, always the political elites will have a certain temptation about instrumentalizing other institutions such as cooperatives for their own political interests. On the other hand, it is unnatural to ask cooperatives not to be involved in politics, because the transformative action of cooperatives into their society is deeply, profoundly political, because they seek to change the balance of power into the society between people, common people, and business elite, and so on. This is the dilemma, and here I want to conclude. This is the dilemma. Is there a third way between the two extremes of assimilation of cooperation inside other political movements and the political disengagement of cooperatives? Is there a space still today for an autonomous political elaboration which derives directly from the heart of cooperative movement? I believe that providing an answer to this question will lead us to one of the most important issues for the global cooperative movement nowadays. the exigency of creating a strong and suasive political identity of cooperation to face and win the challenges of tomorrow. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you very much for your interesting and inspiring presentation. I'm pretty sure that we will have some questions later on, but for now we will pass to the second speaker, which is Ms. Zofia Chyra-Rolicz from Siedlce University. Professor Chyra-Rolicz, if you are ready, please, you can begin your presentation. That's all from me.
Hello, everybody. Do you listen to me? Hello? Do you listen to me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I will talk you about problems of formation of cooperative leaders in Poland in historical perspective and contemporary time of transition. It is a very important problem for understanding the past achievements and contemporary problems, especially difficulties in renovation of cooperative movement after the deep break at the time of beginning of our transition at the end of 20th century and beginning 21st century. As you know, at the beginning of cooperative movement, first co-ops had been created by social leaders from difficult class of society. In Polish circumstances, long-lasting political dependency without own state, the establishment of Polish cooperative was very difficult, was a manifestation of power of Polish society, some link of Polish society. The cooperative leaders were recruited from nobles or good educated men, sometimes in the spirit of charity and as foundation supporting by own sources. In this time, we saw also the big part of Catholic priests engaged into developing cooperative movement according to the social knowledge of the Catholic Church. Another group of cooperative leaders traced its origin back to intelligentsia, the group of good educated people working as so-called free professions, teachers, doctors of medicine, journalists, small bourgeois, sometimes bigger bourgeois. We can present many persons. At first, I can remind the priest Stanisław Staszic, who was the pioneer of economic collaboration among peasants. It was very early. He founded the Association for Common Rescue in Adversities. It was in 1918. It had happened near small town Hrubieszów in southeast Polish territory. And so it was just some kind of foundation, private foundation, which educated peasants to common economic activity. It was acting very long time, up to 1953, up to socialism time, with different experiences, but the social links were very close, and it was a very good area of civilization, progress of civilization. So it was a very good pattern to how to support the peasants in the rather undeveloped part of Polish territory, which of course were dependent in political reasons. It was the interesting experience very early to compare with Charles Fourier, Robert Owen, and it exists long time, another up to after Second World War time. Next was the generation of Polish priests. For young generation, in the middle of 19th century, especially in Polish territory under German power. It was so priests as Antoni Szamarzewski, Piotr Wawrzyniak, and also priest Wacław Bliziński, which was acting on the border with Germany, but it was in part under Russian power, part of territory in Russian power. So it was the main person, there were main person which created the so-called Wielkopolski system kredytowy. Wielkopolska credit system, which support peasants and small craftsmen. It was not only the economic activity, it was also activity to support Polish national spirit. So educational activity. They support to establish libraries, chorus, something like that, to organize the common festivals. So it was very important for support national spirit against the wave of Germanization on this part of territory. So they were more educated than to compare with person which belonged to the cooperatives. So they were like leaders, very accepted, which felt their great mission to do something better for their social neighbors or social class which were around them. So after when the when Poland were independent during the middle two wars time, it was this Wielkopolska credit system was a very strong part of cooperative movement. So another part of cooperative leaders belonged in the past to the political parties, peasant parties, which were acted among people living in countryside. They organized different kinds of cooperatives. So, for example, saving and credit cases, dairy cooperatives, craftsmen cooperatives. The great man from this kind of leaders, it was Franciszek Stefczyk, also one of the very great person in Polish cooperative movement. He was good educated, doctor of philosophy from University of Vienna. He was also teacher in agriculture school in Czernichów, near Kraków, and he adapted the Raiffeisen patterns to cope to the Polish circumstances and had worked in Galicia. At first, it was the beginning of his activity, but this activity was very big, developed in the future. So after 2 or 3 decades of it was a very great result to eliminate usury without bureaucracy. He rescued thousands of farms, and it was very great for circumstances of poor Galicia. It was a great success of cooperatives, cooperative movement, and personnel from Franciszek Stefczyk and many other leaders, simply peasants, which were organized by them, sometimes bourgeois, and it was also the kind of economic education, economic knowledge, the knowledge of booking, management. Another type of social cooperative leaders were leaders which were from socialist parties. They were more orientated to create the consumer cooperative among workers in factories or small cities. At the morning session, it was the speech about philosopher Edward Abramowski, which created a special program to support Polish society, to prepare society to have own independent state and to live the social links, and also to build the better life in economical ideas and economical circumstances of living, level of living. So during the Second Republic, in the Middle World War, the cooperative movement was very popular in many groups of people, among peasants, of course, because Poland was a rather agriculture country, and also cooperatives of consumer cooperatives were very popular among workers and middle class, small middle class in the towns, cities. So it was a very big success of plenty of leaders, maybe not so known yet as Marian Rapacki, Stanisław Wojciechowski, the president of Republic, but it was a very great work. Just the second or the third generation of cooperators, which really made civilization progress on Polish lands. And so it was also the problem how they lived, how they felt their mission. They cross over only simple everyday needs, but they thought about to have good horizons, social horizons, to be better educated, to be better trained. So it was the very great work for community. And during the Second World War, the group of cooperators in the countryside and in towns, they were also very strong connected with resistant movement, and co-ops as a social institution supports the many kind of fighters against German Nazis, so on. And of course, after the Second World War, we have completely different political circumstances. It was the heavy heritage of real socialism in Poland and the Middle East Europe. So their experiences were so not good looking, especially Edward Abramowski. it was the time of a very big development of cooperative movement, but not movement, co-ops as an institution. It was rather co-ops are acting were acting under the central planned economy. Planned economy, and it was there were no circumstances to create educated, authentic political or economical leaders on spirit of volunteers, because it was the duty to realize the plan, the central economy, the plan of central economy. It was also very difficult to have own their point of view. It was not time. From one side, we have plenty of schools with cooperative, connected with cooperative unions, but it was just preparing rather clerks than prepare authentic political or economical leaders in spirit of volunteers, spontaneous and oriented into real social needs. It was the heritage for central prepared plans. The best way for a career of those people was to agree with all political ideas and parties' commands. People defined its proverb name of this exclusive in this part of Europe as a West German car BMW, BMW, which was translated to be passive, resistless, mediocre but faithful. It was very difficult to find examples for real new cooperative leaders working according to the democratic cooperative principles and rules under the condition of central planned economy. Even in this time, we have in 80s a group of small people which try to solve their own problems as lack of apartments, of houses, to create building cooperatives. But it was rather very small margin, supported by political parties, especially peasant parties for their younger activities, but it was not some kind of renovation of cooperative movement in this time. So next we have the very big political change. So that was at the beginning of transition time, at the 80s and 90s of 20th century, the group of cooperative managers acted in condition of central planned economy had been decreased, and also the cooperatives had been aged quickly. They experience also the unpopular image of cooperative, which have been seen as a relics of real socialism. So the time of political and economical transition into free market rivalry in economic of globalization brings the new challenges for the co-ops. After a deep decrease in rural cooperatives, we have observed the proof of rebuilt cooperative movement. One of this kind of proof was a group of agriculture producers, which were supported by common union funds. So it was a problem to find good leaders from this kind of activity. Another part of co-ops which appeared during the time of transition, it was social co-ops. There were the new type of co-ops which have appeared in time of transition, answering for new challenges. Sometimes those kind of cooperatives were established by the people which really were unemployment for a long time. Sometimes this kind of co-ops collaborate with housing co-ops, but in this new, for the co-ops, met many difficulties according lack of legislation, lack of capitals, and not understanding their goals. There were very strong barriers to overcome for activity. It was the problem of leadership. The great still unsolved problem is to find a good leaders which can understand members of this kind of common enterprises and be accepted by them. He or she, of course, sometimes they are women also, he or she should has own experiences in backside of life and also the capacity for leadership persons, authority among them, and also good economic knowledge, which is very important, good external relation with local authority and other organization, because it is necessary to organize the fund, especially the beginning of activity. Very seldom we can find person, joint authority and joint authority with those abilities. Very often persons with difficult experiences of homeless or former prisoners don't inspire a confidence outside at local authorities, bank, or potential clients of users. Instead of them, personal problems of lack very specific person as leaders, we can observe long-lasting several barriers, increase difficulties on way of establishing a new social co-ops or sometimes a group of producers. Another problem we can observe in housing co-ops, where we can observe the conflict between the old group of old leaders, bureaucrats, rather clerks in cooperatives, with younger people which belong to cooperative. The housing cooperation is the area of conflicts between old group of leaders versus young leaders. Big groups of old leaders are very strong in long existing co-ops. They usually were recruited from the part of nomenclatura, former nomenclatura, or new nomenclatura. Very often we can observe how they treat their co-ops like own manor, profiting for them or close relatives persons. So it seems to me that is essential problems for renovation of the cooperative movement. It is the lack of leaders from young generation which will understand the value and wide, flexible possibilities of this movement. It is also the problem of education and training towards common economic activity oriented into common interest, not only to individual success or material careers. Polish co-ops have taken attention to early education of cooperative in cooperative matters among children. It was some kind of the young scholars co-ops, which were supported by peasant cooperatives or consumer cooperatives, but it is rather very narrow group. The actual question is how to reach the young cooperative leaders and how they should be. In fact, there is no permanent cooperative education and training. Sometimes they are organized course for employees concerning the legislation, concerning the new rules of tax rule, but was not education about cooperatives value, cooperative principles. It was very seldom showing this kind of perspective, long-lasting perspective of cooperative movements. It has been seen that the lack of young cooperative leaders which are able to conduct economic activity orientated into cooperative principles, understanding the meaning of social challenges and success activity. There is a deep gap between older generation of cooperative management staff in many co-ops and all challenges in contemporary circumstances for making business. There is another big problem, how to be a good manager without authority based on social confidence. The bad experience of former decades, especially in time of political and economical transition, which has abounded of plenty criminal affairs, brought in consequence lack of social confidence to new unknown managers, offering beautiful perspective and easy big surplus. In the result, people lost their money and confidence for new ideas, leader, and common activity. After these bad experiences, investors are rather carefully preferring develop business in own hands. Sometimes it is possible to be a good manager at the beginning without authority, but it is necessary to have a charismatic spirit, which is rather individual personal attribute as the first step for future activity. There is also necessary the knowledge how to provide the other people to common work and to have very clear, defined opinions, acting according its and faithful to accepted rules and ability to practical realization their defined goals, principles, and values. Very important is also ability to quickly make a decision, particularly in crisis abilities, in crisis situations, and possibility to inspire other partners. Anyway, those abilities are additionally, the basic is permanent training, catching new professional knowledge and competence, acquirements to divide these arts with others. The good manager for social economy enterprises, also co-ops, should be good educated, smart, modest, don't elevate about others, and helpful for them. Some of these attributes are innate, some are rich after relation with staff and care their needs. New formation of cooperative leaders should catch all these attributes to be very flexible according to the market situation. The most important, besides art of management, is ability to listen to social needs and challenges and be able to answer for it quickly. Education and training of modern cooperative leaders is very important for the future of our movement, heavily fighting for surviving on free markets in condition of growing globalization in industry industrial and agricultural production, services and trades. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for the presentation covering complicated and crooked history and tradition of Polish cooperative movement. I think we can all agree that in different times we need different types of leader. That's, I guess, the lesson from history of Polish cooperative movement. But we have to move on to the third presentation, which will be delivered by Leo Marić, who is going to present us a presentation entitled Between Autonomy and State Control, Cooperative Ideas in Croatia in Interwar Period and the Second World War. Mr. Marić, if you are ready, please begin your presentation. And later on, we will begin discussion about all three presentations delivered in that session.
Okay. So, hello one more time. I will speak today about the history of Croatian cooperative ideas and the movement actually in the first half of the 20th century, with the special accent on the interwar period and the Second World War. For a start, I would like to point to an interesting fact which also has some significance for the history of cooperative movement in Croatia. In Croatian language, the same word, zadruga, has actually two meanings. The first meaning is that of a communal family, Hauskommunion is called in German, that is multi-generational family living in one household under the one roof. And the second meaning is cooperative, as defined by International Cooperative Alliance, an autonomous association of persons united voluntarily to meet their common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise. And this is not coincidence, this similar meaning, because the process of creation of first cooperatives in Croatia happens exactly in the second half of the 19th century, in parallel with the erosion of communal families caused by the expansion of capitalism in Croatian countryside, the abolishing of feudalism and serfdom in Croatia in 1848, and later gradual disappearance of communal family as the main source of social solidarity in the pre-capitalist Croatia had a grave social and economic consequences for Croatian society. Cooperatives were one of the solutions offered for that set of problems. The first cooperative in Croatia was crafting cooperative in Pitomača, small town in the center of Croatia. It was established in 1862. 2 years later, in 1864, on island of Korčula in southern Dalmatia, the first credit cooperative was created. And cooperatives were soon created in most of Dalmatia and to lesser extent in continental Croatia, mostly having as a role model the ideas of Hermann Schulze-Delitzsch, a famous German cooperative thinker. However, the real upsurge in the cooperative organizing, especially in the Croatian countryside, started in 1900. In that year, two important events for the cooperativism in Croatia happened. Firstly, First Croatian Catholic Congress in Zagreb was held, and they affirmed the alternative for capitalism was the cooperativism. At the same Congress, they founded the Committee for Founding of Raiffeisen Cooperatives and they started to promote this in whole of Croatia. The next year, Catholic Church in Croatia created Croatian Agricultural Bank with the intention of helping agricultural cooperatives in their development. And the second important event was that Antun and Stjepan Radić, famous Croatian politicians and intellectuals, created the journal Dom, it means home, and started propagating the new peasant ideology. The central point of this new ideology was actually cooperativism. And this is very important because the next 2 years later, they founded Croatian People's Peasant Party, which in the interwar period became the biggest Croatian party with more than 60% of Croatian voters voting for that party. Catholic social teaching and this peasant ideology remained two main directions in Croatian cooperative movement, with correspondingly Catholic Church as the main organizer, and also Croatian People's Peasant Party. So those two organizations were the main instigators of cooperative movement for the whole of the first half of the 20th century. The First World War and the economic problems of the post-war years caused widespread skepticism over the abilities of liberal capitalist system to successfully organize economic life in the country. The experience of war economy with the rising role of the state in economic processes, the experience of war solidarity at the battlefront and at the home front probably induced the rise of egalitarian syndrome among the population, as well as encouraged more positive attitudes toward collectivist models of economy. In parallel with that, Radić's party, Croatian People's Peasant Party, in the interwar rebranded as Croatian Republican Peasant Party and finally just into the Croatian Peasant Party, became the dominant political force among Croatian voters in Yugoslavia, garnering between 60% and 80% of all of Croatian votes during the 20s and the 30s. The party had built extremely large network of social and economic organizations promoting peasant ideology all over the Croatia and helping in development of Croatian countryside. On the picture on the left side, you can see Stjepan Radić speaking to the masses in Zagreb. Just a few numbers to get you understand what kind of influence I'm talking about. So here you can see all of the main national unions of cooperatives in Croatia, number of their cooperatives in all of the respective union, and the membership number of people that were member in those cooperatives. The strongest and the oldest, actually the strongest was the Central Union of Croatian Peasant Cooperatives, which was under the influence of Catholic cooperativism. The oldest one was Croatian Slavonian Economic Society, which was actually founded in the first half of the 19th century, but it was in the start only humanitarian organization, and only in the last decade of the 19th century it became the Cooperativist Union. And then we have the Cooperativist Union in Ljubljana in Slovenia, which was also very much popular in Croatia. They had a lot of chapters in Croatia. Then we have a Union of Serbian Agricultural Cooperatives, which were cooperatives of Serbian minority in Croatia. And lastly, but the most important actually, is the Economic Concord. It was the organization founded by Croatian Peasant Party in the 30s, which was actually coordinating all of the peasant cooperatives under the auspices of Croatian Peasant Party. And they organized the economic education, also the organization of economic life on the Croatian countryside and so on. And you can see that they had 185,000 members in the country of only around 5 million people in that time. This work of cooperatives in Croatia was legally regulated by a state relatively early. Already in 1873, Parliament in Vienna promulgated law on economic cooperatives, which was also applicable to Dalmatia and Istria, because those two lands were part of Austria and part of Austria-Hungary. 2 years later, Croatian Parliament, Sabor, promulgated a new commercial code, which also regulated cooperatives. And this law was active only on the part of Croatia and Slavonia, which was part of Hungarian part of Austria-Hungary. In 1898, a new law on economic and crafts credit unions was created. And all of those laws remained in practice until the 30s. So it was for nearly more than half a century. And they were not changed after the creation of Yugoslavia. In all of the parts of Yugoslavia, a lot of old laws remained active, even during the whole time of interwar Yugoslavia. And only in this year, in 1937, National Assembly of Yugoslavia made a new law on economic cooperatives, which tried to some extent take autonomy of the agricultural cooperatives, but not to make some big difference. However, in the meantime, in 1929, they established State Directory of Agricultural Credit as part of the Ministry of Agriculture, which decided to which cooperatives loans should be given. 4 years later, in 1929, the government established Privileged Agrarian Bank for the same purpose, but also started to create its own agricultural cooperatives instead of giving loans to the existing cooperatives and cooperative unions. The goal of the new government policy was presumably to establish some sort of control of influence over the huge sector of cooperativist economy which was rising. In the meantime, during the 30s, cooperativism found their adherents also among the right-wing intellectuals, mostly those associated with the Catholic solidarism. They criticized capitalist system from the right wing and nationalist perspective as materialist, cosmopolitan, and socially unjust. Since they were also not very much fond of Marxist socialism, of course, they were in search of some sort of third way, third position, and corporativism and cooperativism were seen as two most important parts of this envisioned alternative to capitalism and socialism. The main representative of Catholic solidarist current in interwar Croatia was Milan Ivšić, economist and social thinker, professor at the Economic and Commercial High School in Zagreb, the predecessor of today's Economic Faculty in Zagreb. Ivšić considered the goal of cooperativism to be to restrain market relations and to remove tradesmen, merchants as intermediate between the consumer and the producer. He envisioned that through consumer cooperatives, producers and consumers would themselves exchange products and money without any intermediate. Ivšić was not an enemy of private property. He actually thought of it as more efficient than the state ownership. However, he promoted the concept of limited private property. In his view, the property has some sort of social function, not just subjective function to its owner. Therefore, it has to be used to satisfy its social function. It should be regulated to some degree. Another notable intellectual dealing with cooperative ideas in the 30s was young Vilko Riger, the student of Ivšić. Riger wrote several lengthy articles about the history of cooperativist movement and ideas in the nationalist press during the 30s. He believed that the state and cooperatives are in constant conflict. The state wants to take control over cooperatives, and in the same time, cooperatives want to take control over the state by making whole society to function according to the cooperativist principles. In that period, Riger and his comrades in Croatian nationalist movement were strongly in favor of building cooperatives based on the principle of autonomy, and he was very much critical of fascist Italy and National Socialist Germany over their tries to restrict autonomy of cooperatives in Italy and Germany, respectively. After the German-led attack on Yugoslavia in April 1941, the country fell apart and the independent Croatia was established with Ustaša movement in power. The important role in the new government and governing circles had pre-war Catholic and nationalist intellectuals. Therefore, cooperativist ideas gained a new prominence in the mainstream politics. Vilko Riger, whom I mentioned earlier, himself held several high-ranking positions. Between October 1941 and February 1944, he was the chief of propaganda of independent state of Croatia, and in the same time, he was also teaching about cooperativist economy at the Economic Faculty in Zagreb. However, in the new geopolitical circumstances, Riger publicly promoted strong etatist version of cooperativism. In the booklet about cooperativist system, published already in 1941, Riger claims cooperatives are still autonomous and free, but its freedom should be redefined in the sense that they should work inside the framework put on by the state authorities. In that way, cooperatives has to be used as an instrument of state social and economic policies. To put that into practice, the Ustaša regime closed Economic Concord, the main organization of the pre-war Croatian Peasant Party. Its competencies were given to the newly created Croatian Peasant Economic Community, the state institution subordinated to the Ministry of Crafts, Industry and Trade. To conclude, Croatian cooperative movement, since its start in the second half of the 19th century, was based on the models of Hermann Schulze-Delitzsch and Friedrich Wilhelm Raiffeisen, German cooperativist thinkers, as well as on the ideas connected to Catholic social teachings and Stjepan Radić's peasant ideology. Cooperatives, which were numerous, preserved wide autonomy and freedom of activity until 1941, despite limited attempts of Yugoslav regime in the 20s and 30s to assert some level of control over them. What is interesting is that there was practically no transmission of cooperativist ideas between Serbian and Croatian cooperative movement, despite we shared the same political framework for more than 20 years in the interwar period. What's more, even Serbian cooperative movement inside Croatian lands, Croatian minority, functioned as totally isolated from the Croatian cooperativist current, instead looking to Serbia for potential models and help. With the creation of independent Croatia in 1941, the new Croatian government restrained autonomy of cooperatives and used them only as an instrument in their public policies. However, after 1945 and the establishment of communist dictatorship, cooperatives totally lost any autonomy, and cooperativist policies were used by the new regime for collectivization of agriculture. But that's totally another story, and I'm over.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. We have already listened to 3 speakers that were scheduled for this session. As I mentioned before, now we can start our discussion panel. Whoever has some kind of questions to our speakers, please raise your hand and ask your question.
There is already a question on chat asked before.
Yes, I saw it. And do we have the person who asked that question still with us, or are we?
Yes, I think Shmuel is raising hand.
Okay, so please, Mr. Shmuel, you can ask your question personally.
Yeah, I hear. I got my question in chat too, but now I will repeat by mic. Okay, I want to ask you, and my question addressing to all 3 panelists. I want to ask you if today, in nowadays period, we can to use in traditional models of cooperation, traditional models of creating of cooperatives, because in the lectures of this session, we spoke more about cooperation in historical perspective, and the question if this appropriate to our modern period, or very maybe today we need to think about any new form of cooperation that will be more good for present modern epoch. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. So we have a dilemma whether the historical models of cooperation are still valid and actual. So the question was rather general, so maybe one of our speakers feel well in charge to answer that question.
Well, if there isn't anyone, can I begin?
Yes, you're welcome.
Okay. Well, thank you for the question. It is very interesting because, well, I think that how the potentialities of cooperatives are valorized, it depends very much on the amount of social capital, as I said during my presentation, the amount of social capital in the community. For example, in Italy, we have certain cooperative milieu, for example, the territory of Bologna, where there is a high degree of social innovation among cooperatives and other institutions which collaborate with cooperatives and so on. So in part, yes, it is absolutely necessary that in each epoch, in each era, there is an innovation about how cooperative works. I think that today cooperative innovation has to be distinguished into two different aspects. There is an entrepreneurial issue, and in particular, for example, today I think that it is necessary to resolve one of the most important problems of the cooperatives in their history, their difficulty in collecting capital for capital-intensive investment, because I think that this is very important if we want to have worker cooperatives active, for example, in high-tech sectors, or to increase the productivity of cooperatives, which is another focus point in the competition with capitalist enterprises. And on this point of view, my suggestion is that, and it is interesting knowing what you think about it. I think that about this issue, we should think about using other types of enterprises as instruments of cooperatives. For example, cooperatives may opening societies which can be active in the stock exchange to collect capitals. There are some cooperative enterprises in Italy, for example, if I am not wrong, Gramerolo, which is a very important society which produces milk, that works in this way, using social other societies, capitalist societies, as instruments to collect the capital or you manage some processes. And there is another side of cooperative innovation, which is cultural. I think that today it is crucial creating consensus in the global public opinion, creating cooperative culture. And in this way, we need, I think, also a series of links between the cooperative movement and intellectuals, academics, and communicators to create a new cooperative narration, a new cooperative narrative to make people aware that cooperative values and cooperative movement are the key solution to face the challenges, the global challenges of tomorrow. And all these are aspects of innovations. So without any doubt, we have not to sterilize the discussion about traditional ways to cooperate. We have to continuously innovate cooperation. And the problem is how innovating cooperation without losing the traditional value of cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your voice. I believe that all three presentations we had during the session shared the common core of the question of autonomy of cooperatives. And all three presentations more or less explicitly were connected to the question of autonomy. Perhaps someone else wants to ask some questions to our speakers. Feel free to raise your hand and ask about it.
I can answer for the useful historical experience for modern time in cooperative movement. It seems to me the old cooperative, old co-ops still exist, but they lost members. They are eliminated in national economy during the time of transition because they were not flexible, and it was a very strong campaign against traditional cooperative movement, which was seen in Poland only as a relict of real socialism. So it is a very strong mental barriers for people to create new cooperatives or to join the old cooperatives. The strong position, housing co-ops has a strong position because they have own properties, buildings, and people living in this building. But it is very difficult problem to create new cooperative. It is problem of lack of capitals and necessary to have some kind of support by local government, by another social organization, non-profit organization, and also it is problem of lack of very good state policy supporting this kind of cooperatives, especially after the 3 months after the beginning when where they should exist on free market. It is problem of also uncertain economic situation. It seems to me that it's necessary to follow the new social challenges, to find a place for them, for their acting, new cooperatives. And it seems to me that is rather a problem of how to create new small cooperative with a few persons, not very big enterprises, because it's very expensive, very difficult to create in circumstances of uncertain economic situation. And another problem for principles and values, it is how to keep the cooperatives values and principles in free market rivalry. It is necessary just to live, just to have a struggle for surviving, not looking for beautiful ideas, but for everyday needs to survive. And so it is a very big problem that it is a gap between old cooperatives, ideas, principles, values, type of leaders, and the challenges of contemporary time. So it is also the lack of leaders, as I told. So the leaders which are, of course, we have education in management, in economic management, but it is orientated only for free market, joint companies, joint stock companies, something like that, rather liberal orientated, not for common activity, for common surplus divided between members. So it is also a problem for those leaders, how to make a big career and how to gain a very big money, something like that, which is in opposite in this kind of social work, social mission, as was observed in past time. So it seems to me that it's very difficult to renovate the cooperative movement now. Maybe it's necessary the special kind of state policy, special new regulation supporting this kind of activity as a problem of social policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the answer, for answering the question. I saw that Leo Marić raised his hand. Do you want to answer the question that appeared in chat box?
Yes, first that, and then I want to ask one question myself. So
Okay,
to answer this question, I hope Mrs. Taylor hear us. There was no any real stable connections between this Croatian Peasant Party cooperatives and Catholic Solidarism, because Croatian Peasant Party was radically anti-clerical. It was not anti-Christian, anti-Catholic, but it was anti-clerical, strongly secularist, and these were actually two totally separate political camps in interwar Croatia: Catholic movement and the Croatian Peasant Party. And about this connection, actually lack of connection between Croatian and Serbian movements, I doubt this is any source of this. I think actually we established totally separate national movements already in the 19th century. So I suppose some sort of this enmity in the interwar period was the source of this lack of any contacts, any transmission or any exchange of ideas. I suppose. I don't know what is the concrete reason. And I have one question for Professor Zofia, which spoke before me. Was there any positive attitude toward the cooperative ideas among the camp of Narodova Demokracija, or only PSL and socialists?
Yes, may I answer? So, of course, they are very good ideas for of national democracy to establish cooperatives, especially credit cooperatives, in time of German occupation of Polish territory, Wielkopolska, and so on, part of Silesia and Pomerania. It was orientated to support to stronger the Polish middle class, because it was a very strong regime against Polish national spirit. So they support national spirit, and it was very interesting that they support craftsmen, they support banks, Polish cooperative banks, banking co-ops, but not consumer cooperatives, which were only a few, because it was against the class of Polish merchants. It was necessary to join to create social links and not to begin the antagonism between a different group of peoples. So during the Middle War Poland, the national democracy was rather strong in the western part of Poland, former German occupation. So they were rather orientated into support peasants, big agriculture landlords, so big enterprises in agriculture, just to support the social level of civilization. And we have another orientation of cooperative movement, in influence of Socialist Party, which were more popular among workers, craftsmen in the small cities, also in Galicia and in part of Poland, which in central part of Polish territory under the Russia power, Russia state. So it was the program of joined together for their own social everyday consumer needs, for better quality of living, just to make common shoppings, just to create the common activity, cultural activity, as libraries, chorus, some kind of performance, theater, not professional theater. Just it was also the cooperative newspapers, and it was a very really big cooperative propaganda oriented into young generation. The special newspapers for young people, for children. There was problems of organizing the training of young cooperatives, and it was also lasting during the time of the Second World War under the Third Reich occupation, because co-ops in Poland exist, but officially without social activity, and they were the part of war economy, of German war economy. But in spite of this, co-ops were the very strong point supporting the resistance movement. It was, of course, an illegal activity in conspiracy, but it was very effective. So maybe it is something interesting also for you. Yes.
Thank you.
Do we have any other question? Perhaps there's someone else who wants to ask our speakers. If not, then perhaps I will ask question to Samuel Boscarello. I think that from your presentation, you showed that there are at least two different usage of cooperative ideas when it comes to a political and economical struggle. The first way that was presented by, for example, Sicilian cooperatives. It is a rather usage of cooperative idea of cooperatives as a tool for further facilitation of revolutionary changes. And on the other hand, northern cooperatives could be seen as some kind of collective form of building individual benefit, so that they are something. They have something in common with, let's say, small commercial companies. And I wonder, what is the explanation of such division of cooperativism within just one society? Are the economical differences are the only factor here, or there were some other, in example, cultural differences that hidden at that discussion between two strategies you've mentioned?
Thank you for the question. Well, there is a recurrent issue in the history of Italy about this difference of approach. If leftist parties should have kept on a reformist policy or a revolutionary policy in the different part of the country. I remember that there was an intellectual, I think Sidney Taro, I don't want to commit an error, who proposed that the Italian Communist Party should have pursued two different policies: in northern Italy reformist, in southern Italy revolutionary. I think that these ideas are linked to the fact that effectively there are important differences into the composition of society in northern Italy and southern Italy, which are also cultural. Robert Putnam said something that I said in partly is correct. There is a difference about the structure of political power, for example. In Sicily and in southern Italy in 19th century and also after, there have been a lack of political leadership in a sense of social innovation, a much more selfish attitude to the power by the political elites. For example, it is reflected also, for example, in the well-working of school institutions. In the 19th century, in northern Italy, there were elementary schools much more well working than in the southern Italy. In southern Italy, the illiteracy rate was much higher. So also the frontier of political opportunity is different. In northern Italy, there is more space for reformist experimentations. In southern Italy, there is not much space. There are stories which are very creepy about abuses of aristocrats in Sicily in 19th century. They resemble really the feudality. And so I don't want to say that there is a path dependence, but it was very difficult also for fascist leaders effectively to not to think about revolution or insurrection. I think that their limit has been that they thought to cooperative simply as a political instrument. So they thought that the